Matthew's Gospel, we hear Jesus call his followers the salt of the earth. That may have been the first time that metaphor had been used in quite that way. And if so, it would have been a little confusing. After all, salt had many different uses. So the most likely response when Jesus told his followers that they were the salt of the earth was probably puzzlement. It could have many meanings and still does. Today, however, we mostly use it to describe people who are good, honest, decent folks who are just trying to get by. They are the salt of the earth, so we say. Maybe that is what Jesus meant. But given the context, it is more likely that Jesus was implying much more than that. Salt, after all, was required for certain grain offerings to God, as noted in the book of Leviticus. You shall season all your grain offerings with salt. You shall not let the salt of the covenant with your God be missing from your grain offering. With all of your offerings, you shall offer salt. In interpretation, it is thought now that the addition of salt to this offering was because it acknowledged and reminded them of their everlasting covenant with God. Here is where we are most likely to find the meaning behind Jesus' words. He was soon to establish a new covenant that would last forever, and they, his followers, were to become the visible reminder of that new covenant. They were the salt of the earth because they were now an offering as well, and a means by which that covenant would continue. Hence the warning then that Jesus gave them. If the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. To be the salt of the earth, we need to maintain that covenant relationship with God so that we will also have that certain quality of character that might make people want to call us the salt of the earth. What if every time we used salt, it also reminded us that we have an everlasting covenant with God? That would help us to maintain our covenant relationship with God so that we could also maintain whatever it is within us that makes us good for the world. As one person noted, salt does not just savor, it saves. The world is an altar. Humanity and the world are to become a single great offering to God. As we offer ourselves in obedient suffering, self-sacrifice, we become the seasoning on a cosmic sacrifice that makes it well-pleasing to God. We are a sign that God's covenant with humanity is everlasting, and we are the means by which the world will be saved through Christ. Right now, we are still a little ways from the season of Lent, but when that time comes, you might want to place a container of salt somewhere so that you will see it every day, just to remind you that you have a covenant with God and a mission to make the world around you a better place. Jesus also used another metaphor, which he claimed for himself as well. You are the light of the world, he said. And elsewhere in the Gospels, he also said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Both statements are true. We often say of some people that when they walk in, they light up the room. We are happy to see them because their very presence brings us joy. And certainly Jesus was that kind of person, but he was also light in the sense of being wisdom and truth. In the darkness, we can become afraid that there are monsters hiding in the shadows. But when the light is turned on, we can see things more clearly as they really are. The metaphor implies that the presence of Jesus brings us wisdom and truth, so that we may dispel the darkness and the fear inside of us. And those who follow him also become a means by which darkness is dispelled around them. And here again, there is a warning attached. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl, Jesus said. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. When you become such a source of light, the people who prefer the light will be attracted to its brightness, but the people who prefer the darkness will do everything they can to put that light out. Regardless, we must still shine. God intends for us to shine, so that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. We are lighthouses. The light comes from Christ within us, and that is why both statements are true. Jesus is the light of the world, and we are too, to the extent that we follow Jesus and we let his light shine in all that we do. Therefore, when Lent comes around later this month, you might want to also put a small candle or flashlight next to that container of salt as a reminder that you are the light of the world. In Christ, we have the ability to drive back the darkness that so many seem to prefer and shed a little light on the situation around us. We know the words of Jesus and the truth that he has shared with us. That makes us truth tellers and light bringers within our world. And finally, Jesus also made another surprising claim that came as a response to those who accused him of not following the law. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. We know, however, that Jesus did reinterpret much that had been written. He began many of his teachings by saying, "You have heard that it is said, but I tell you." Regarding the law of Moses and its requirements, some things really did change, but many things did not. Jesus seemed to want it both ways. Anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Admittedly, there was always the written law and a sort of oral law that was practiced by the Pharisees, one that heaped many rituals and requirements on top of it. Jesus had little use for any of that. And so when he told his followers that their righteousness should exceed that of the Pharisees, he was actually setting the bar pretty low. His yoke was easy. It just involved maintaining the spirit of the law, rather than merely strict adherence to all the ritual rules that the Pharisees had established. His followers, for instance, could act to help someone who was suffering even on the Sabbath, because as Jesus said, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So if in some ways Jesus did away with the requirements of the law, then how could he also claim not to do so? The key is in his words. Not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Maybe it is no coincidence that when Jesus drew his last breath on the cross, just before he died, he said, "It is finished." At that moment, everything had been accomplished. And thereafter, by faith, his righteousness became our righteousness as well. And his righteousness, of course, far exceeded that of any Pharisee. It is from that place of grace now that we live and work and have our being. We can be the salt of the earth. We can be the light of the world because of what Jesus accomplished on the cross. So you might want to put a small cross beside that container of salt and source of light, just to remind you that your righteousness comes from Christ. Strangely enough, it is from sal, the Latin word for salt, and salt's ability to preserve, that we get our word salvation. We who have been saved are now the salt of the earth. We are God's light in this world, and we are God's means to bring his salvation to that world. The more we become like him, the more righteous we will become also, and the easier that task of bringing God's salvation to the world will become for us. Be safe, and God bless you.